There we go. Hi, everyone. You are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph with my awesomely wonderful, incredible guest, Engel. And we'll get to
I
him
am
in a
Engl.
moment. What?
Hi.
Hi. So Simply SCAdian, no title required is a show about the regular people in the SCA. We don't talk to peers. We don't talk to royal peers. We don't talk to landed baron and baronesses or court baron and baronesses. This is about folks who don't have those fancy titles because they are just as, if not more, awesome than those fancy titled people. We are always looking for guests. Please, on our Facebook page, we have a link, to a sign up form so you can nominate people to be guests on the show. That out of the way, Engel, good evening. Welcome to Simply SCAdian, no title required.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, and I have to say that Lucas is sorry that he can't be here, but he got stuck in a rehearsal tonight for a play. So we will see him again in 2 weeks. All right. Engel, how did you find the SCA?
So I have, from a very young age, I was obsessed with swords and frequently saw in my mind visions of swords and armor. And just growing up in the South, there wasn't any outlet for me to find swords or do things regarding swords and sword fighting. And I kept it to myself. As I got older, around 20 or 21, I started noticing in myself an obsession with Landsknecht, who are German mercenaries, basically, if you're not familiar with them. I don't know where that came from. And it got to a point around the age of 27 where I realized I had to find somewhere where I could go to be a Landsknecht in a public place and sort of make my self image that I had always felt I was in my head into real life, even if it was only me playing for a few hours every weekend. So it's always come from sort of I sort of sought out the SCA to engage with who I thought my inner self was, which is a Landsknecht.
So did you know about Landsknecht before you found the SCA then?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know where I first learned about Landsknecht as a mercenary unit. Around the time I I first remember knowing about them around the age of 20 or 21, but the image of mercenary fighters and their style of clothing has been with me basically for all of my memory, which sounds quite insane, but some people just kind of know who they are and what they like from a very young age. I went to a Christian classical school Christian classical private school that taught a lot of Renaissance and classical history. So I imagine that somewhere maybe in middle school or something like that, like looking at Renaissance art as study material is probably where I was exposed to 16th century art and therefore the Landsknecht. But I to this day I'm still curious why I'm so obsessed with Landsknecht because it's basically my only personality trait. So I would like to know what is what my deal is.
So what is it about the Landsknecht that draws you so much?
So Landsknecht are a lot of people. If you're familiar with Landsknecht, you might people like to like narrow them into this little bubble of mercenaries who are really, really, really well dressed. But the interesting thing about Landsknecht is where they sit in history as a unit, as a type of person, as cultural icons, and as pieces of art history themselves. So, okay, first of all, the thing that gets everybody about Landsknecht is that they're very well dressed and they have a bunch of cool weapons like the ones you can see here in the background of my armory. It's important to understand Landsknecht existed at pretty much the high water mark of melee warfare, that being the early 16th century. So this is a time in warfare when you would have men in pike squares, men with gunpowder weapons, men with cannons, while at the same time you still had knights on charging horseback with swords and shields occasionally, and sword versus sword battles. And at the same time, you had pirates, you had crusades. So it's basically, as far as equipment goes and material history and material culture goes, it's the apex of warfare because you've got absolutely everything while still being able to see you see your enemy and engage with him in a real way. In a lot of ways, warfare after the invention of gunpowder became much more anonymous, much less spirited, much less valorous because we killed each other from afar. But this is a time when, even though we have cool gunpowder weapons, we're still actively going up to people and fighting them. So a lot of people become interested in Landsnake because they've got a bunch of cool weapons. They've got these big, great swords and cool, slashy clothes. But what makes them really interesting when you get into it is that the heyday of the Landsnecht around 1520 is basically a pubescent period between what we consider the early modern and Renaissance period and the medieval period. And Landsnecht as a fighting unit exists in that was also a time before nation states had units of fighting men that we would now call soldiers. So, for instance, the idea of a soldier, what is a soldier? A soldier is someone who is brought up, trained, and paid by the nation state to act as a servant to that state. Whereas a Landsknecht is a mercenary who is simply being paid by a captain who's being given a contract by a noble or an aristocrat to lead battles, to fight wars, and to go off and achieve some military objective. So even though a Landsknecht is a mercenary, mercenaries themselves were very, very common, even outside of the Landsknecht. But what made the Landsknecht unique is that they were able to band into guilds and social forces and basically negotiate for their rights, negotiate for their pay, and even mutiny when they were not paid, which was very often. Them doing this is what eventually led to nations realizing, well, we need to put laws and rules on the men who fight for us, or else we have completely ineffective forces that eventually rebel against us, fight us, and cause collateral damage. Actually, the German word for soldier, not soldier, the German word for mercenary is Soldner, Soldner. This eventually developed into the word we have now, soldier, the base word being sold. Sold in German is the amount of money a mercenary is paid monthly. So his reward for fighting. So the very concept of soldiers now is basically based on civilization's experience of the Landsknecht in the early 16th century. So went off on a bit of a tangent there.
That's totally awesome. I'm like so geeked out right now. So,
Yeah,
how did the Landsknecht start? Where's the beginning of Landsknechtness?
that's really, really complicated. And people have a lot of people have a lot of theories on how they really, really started. The short of it is that in the late 15th century, there was this kingdom called the Kingdom of Burgundy. And if you're a fan of military history or medieval history, you've heard of Burgundy because it's an area that existed, a kingdom that existed between France and Germany and south of England, obviously, but it had like ports and stuff like that. Existed between France and Germany that was incredibly rich, incredibly well off, though it was essentially a vassal state of France. So, and a lot of the chivalric courtly culture, medieval ideals that we have about medieval times come from Burgundy, because their court culture was so great. Anyways, fast forward late 15th century, there's this wonderful guy called Charles the Bold. Charles the Bold hires the best armies money can buy, but he's buying them based off of the medieval tradition of basing them around expensive knights with expensive armor and expensive horses, charging groups of peasants. And that's not starting to work too much anymore. He goes to war with France, invades France quite hastily, and gets beaten back a number of times. On the third time, him wanting to fight back against France and seal a victory, he goes at them again. But the French have these guys called Reichsläufer, the notorious enemies of the Landsknecht. They are Swiss mercenaries, basically trained as a civilization to fight in pike squares. They're not well armored, they're not well trained, but they fight very, very well as a unit. And they use very, very long pikes that enable them to completely negate head-on charges by mounted knights, traditional medieval mounted knights. And they absolutely whoop Charles the Bold's ass. His army is defeated. He himself is killed, loses his kingdom. The kingdom of Burgundy almost basically ceases to exist, and France goes into his land. So the Emperor Maximilian, who was not Holy Roman Emperor at this point yet, he lives in Austria. But the Kingdom of Burgundy, being in terrible straits now, makes a marriage alliance with Emperor Maximilian, and Emperor Maximilian marries Mary of Burgundy. Maximilian, who is basically heir to the Habsburg titles, we still know the Habsburgs, goes over to Burgundy and sees how his, parental grandfather lost his kingdom, was killed in battle, and absolutely embarrassed. And he sees that the Swiss Reichsläufer, with their pike tactics, did this. So he says to himself, I'm no longer going to recruit all these expensive as hell mounted knights that take forever to train. I'm going to train my own band of men to replicate these pike tactics and be able to fight in this new way. It's sort of like the gunpowder revolution before the gunpowder revolution. Before the gunpowder revolution, in medieval times, we had mounted knights, and then we discovered, like Greek hoplites thousands of years ago, that pike phalanxes work very, very well for dealing with that kind of stuff. So basically, the Landsknecht were the Emperor Maximilian's response to the revolution in warfare being pikes. But what he added to the mix was the Swiss basically trained in pikes as a communal action because it was part of the culture and mountain culture of their territories. The Landsknecht trained in pikes as professional military units. So whereas it was a cultural thing with the Swiss and something you kind of did almost like some kids will go out and play basketball now or join the soccer league, in the 16th century, Swiss would go and play pikes with their town and build relationships off that. The Landsknecht did it as military units. Maximilian also did very well in incorporating things called sleeve of shot into the units which the Swiss didn't do. Shot is where basically guns would come. Some people say the guns would come along the side. Some people say they would slither up to the front. It probably changed depending on the unit, but that's where the Landsknecht differed from the Swiss in that they were able to incorporate gunpowder into their pike units.
Whoa. Okay. So how did the Landsknecht train? What was training like for them?
So the unit would have moved based on drums and fife. Basically, if you've seen any movie about the Civil War or the American Revolution, very similar to the way units of men would have moved around in the 16th century. They would have gotten the order to move backwards and forwards from drum and fife. They would have had to group train with the pike because, a pike is an 18-foot long piece of ash. And if you've ever held one before, it's not like an SCA spear, which is made of rattan or fiberglass sometimes. These things are heavy. They're like 20 pounds. 20 pounds of weight that you have to balance along your body, and that moves very slowly. And you have to know how to project that forward quickly to repel assaults, to cover other men. And you need to know how to take it up without harming men around or behind you. So they would have basically uh, trained in marching, in how to use the pike in a very tight formation. It's important that you understand how tight a pike square is, but I don't have the means to illustrate it right now. But basically, it's a very tight unit of men with a bunch of 18-foot long pointy sticks who need to march and move as one unit in order to defend themselves, because a pike alone is basically not a weapon. So it would have required a lot of coordination. Um, and it's something that has repercussions today, because the actual act of marching and being that you see on parade fields in modern militaries today is based on the spirit de corps and sense of decorum that people got from seeing these guys march into town and knowing that they were capable of marching around.
Do you speak and read German?
I know. So the Landsknecht actually have a number of really great marching songs. I've memorized most of them. I can sing in German. I can't speak German other than knowing a few words, but I know most of the good songs. I won't sing them right now. I would be a bit too shy to do that, but you should look them up. They're really, really great songs. Unfortunately, with Landsknecht songs, Landsknecht have always been a very visual and well-known and exciting part of German culture, sort of like samurai are a really exciting part of Japanese culture. Cowboys are a really exciting part of American culture. A lot of cultures have those tough badasses they look back on. So Landsknecht are those German ones. Unfortunately, that means that every part of German society has tried to bring them into their image and make them part of their political philosophy. So unfortunately, in the 1930s and 1940s, a lot of the very good Landsknecht songs were made use of for Nazi propaganda. And even today, unfortunately, a lot of neo-Nazi metal bands will use some of the old Landsknecht marching songs, turn them into metal versions, and sort of use them that way. It's unfortunate, but it's also important in understanding what the Landsknecht means for German society, in the same way of like what a freaking cowboy would mean for American society.
Yeah, so all my friends out there, if you're thinking about learning some Landsknecht songs, do some research before you start belting one out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I behind you is quite an impressive armory.
Oh, why? Thank you.
How did you acquire that? Tell me a little bit about it.
So, from the, I got my first job
God, there's
at,
more.
huh?
Oh my God, there's more.
Oh yeah, it goes on forever. It's quite a problem. Let's see here. Yeah, I have several, I guess you could say, pieces of armor, suits of armor. I don't even have everything displayed because um, I didn't actually set up before this. But I got my first job at Dollar General making $7.25 an hour when I was like 20 or 21. And after I had saved up $600, which was a lot of money for me at the time, I spent $300 on a sword because I've just always loved swords, and it was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I still have that sword. It was a Hanwei Tinker longsword, which you can see in the background there. Um, and ever since then, pretty much all of my money has gone to collecting arms and armor of the 16th century. I hope that as I get older, as my paychecks get bigger, I can have more and be able to decorate an entire house with it. I'm not happy with my collection right now, but I am proud of it. Um, it's just, I guess, it's always sort of been my motivation for having a career and doing stuff is affording more swords and armor.
So
So,
what okay, but seriously, like I've never gotten it because I have a couple swords that I've been gifted.
yeah,
What do you do with them? Because you can't like literally
they're
use them.
super cool, dude.
What do you
They're
do with
fucking
it?
cool. Hold on. Like, I mean, like, I'm not wearing, I put on this shirt, I'm not wearing proper. But like, hold on. Look at this. Okay, so this is a sword called a Katzbalger, right? So one day I intend to go hiking with it. But so here's a cool thing about this kind of sword. It's a sword, right? But also the guys who would make swords at this time, they were also capable of making knives. What do you need when you're on the march? You need to eat, right? Hey, guy who makes swords, could you make me some knives too? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you think you could put them in my scabbard so I don't have to get a separate thing for my knife set? Oh yeah, sure. So they had these things called buy knives, which are basically it's an eating set made by your sword guy that comes with your sword. How exciting!
But
It,
I
what's not to be excited about? Why wouldn't you want all the swords? Look, I can eat with this. I can eat food with the buy knives that are in my scabbard. That's great. That's great. I don't understand why everybody else doesn't want to have a lot of swords and armor. To be honest, I think everybody else is messing up their life because I know exactly what I'm doing with my life for the next 40 years. And like, that's great. Like, I'm not having a fucking midlife crisis. I'm not going to feel the need to buy like a fancy car or like an expensive RV and like have a weird like road trip when I'm in my 50s to reconcile with the fact that I'm half dead because I'm going to spend the rest of my life collecting 16th century arms and armor. Eventually, my goal is to have a cannon. So my next big purchase is Lansec had a type of gun called the Arquebus. The Arquebus is a type of like matchlock gun. You've seen old timey guns that you have to like doot 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 and reload and
right.
prime the powder and all of that. So they had that. That's my next big purchase. I've got to learn how to actually use black powder without injuring myself. But after that, eventually, I'm gonna have a cannon, and I hope that once I do get my cannon, I can use it at Penzik. I can like boom, and shoot the cannon and start the matches and everything like that. I just need to get other Scadians to trust me well enough to shoot a cannon around them and be like, yeah, that guy Engl, he can be trusted with the cannon and gunpowder around me and my family. So if you know anybody that is in charge of those kind of decisions, please point them my way. And I would like to know what the rules are for bringing your cannon to Penn. Yeah.
Okay. We'll
All
talk
right, give
after.
attention there. Am I talking too much?
No, God, not at
Okay.
all. But I'm on
Okay. Cool.
Physics staff, so I can connect you with somebody to help you
Oh,
out.
really? Okay, because I know there's been a lot of drama with when cannons can be fired at Penzik and when they shouldn't be fired, and people with PTSD and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that. But I would like to, at least within the next 5 years, have a cannon. Yeah.
Okay. So how does this awesome, insanely wonderful geekiness that you have here for Lance Connect, how does that play into the SCA where we have to use rattan swords, where you're not actually in a pike square?
Yeah.
You're doing tourneys, you're doing melees at Penzik, for example, but how does that compare, contrast with your love of the Lance Connect?
I've always had trouble reconciling my own participation in the SCA with the rules of the SCA. Not, the rules as in behaving. I've never had a problem with that. But I have always struggled my best to have absolute 100% historical accuracy. I will only wear linen and wool, um, even if it's hot. But unfortunately, the SCA is a game that we play, and we have to play by the rules. We have to use rattan. So I enjoy the actual fighting of rattan, but unfortunately, when I fight, I like to fight in historical plate armor. Historical plate armor is not something that's good to use in SCA combat. It's hard to recognize hits. It's heavy in a way that it doesn't need to be. It's constricting in a way that you don't want to be constricted in SCA heavy combat. So unfortunately, I just take the loss. I if I continue to wear historical plate armor and dress myself in wool in 90-degree pens of heat, I'm going to overheat faster. I'm going to be slower. I'm not going to learn technique as well. And that's a choice that I'm willing to make because for me, participating in the SCA isn't about following a path, or maybe it's about following my own path, that being the path of Lansneck. It's about being myself being a Lansneck and being at all times as close as I can possibly be to the actual physical experience of living in the past. That's a constant journey. It's always a struggle to rid yourself of modern materials. One of the first things I had to do was look at what I was wearing. Is anything I'm wearing cotton? Um, it's great to wear cotton. It's light, but it's not something clothing would have commonly been made of in the 16th century. Unfortunately, the 16th century was also the Little Ice Age, and Lansneck typically existed in Germany. So their environment was much, much colder than it is now here in America in the East Kingdom and below. So the short and skinny of that is that, I have to suffer in the heat a lot more. So everything's a give and take.
So are you squired to anyone?
I am not currently squired to anybody.
Is that a goal you have?
I would like to go down the path of chivalry eventually, but I don't. Right now, I'm trying to figure out how I go about that while staying true to what I want to be.
I know some Lands Connect period people, um,
Yeah,
in, including a Duke. So I'll introduce you to him, and he lives in Atlantia,
thank
which
you.
is where you live right now too, right? You're in Atlantia. So
Yeah,
you told me a little bit before we went live, you told me that you started in the East Kingdom
yeah.
and moved to Drachenwald. And tell me a little bit about, I guess there's two questions that I want to ask. One is to know about your life, traveling in the SCA and what that's been like for you, but also to know how your love of the Lands Connect ties into your current job, your what you do for a living.
Well, I joined the military because I wanted to be more like a Landsnet, I guess it made, and I rationalized. I've been in the military for 10 years now, but I should say I'm in the Navy. So the obvious retort to that would be, it would have made more sense to join the Army than the Navy because Landsneck obviously are on land. However, at the time, I wasn't very when I made the decision to join the military. I wasn't very confident in myself physically, and I also wanted the most comfortable life for myself that I could find. And I thought the Navy would be a good avenue to that. Um, I rationalized my participation in the military as being what a mercenary would do, I suppose, in a way. Like I continue to do it for, I don't want to say money, but for the lifestyle. It's hard to explain. A lot of military people do find SCA culture very strange. It's hard to rationalize it to a lot of people. I've tried to get SCA stuff going at a lot of bases, but it's been a no go. Part of that is me. Maybe I need to be charismatic enough and sell it to people better. Um, One funny thing is like I use my Facebook profile for everybody. So I have like high level like master chiefs and officers and stuff on my Facebook, but also like my SCA friends, and they're just like, "What the fuck? Are you in a cult?" And I'm like, "No, I swear it's not a cult." Oh yeah, sure, it's not a cult. But yeah. Don't forgot where I was going with that. Yeah. Can you give me some direction here? I'm sorry.
No, we were
But
just
being
talking.
active in the military and skating at the same time,
Yes.
very strange experience because actually this is something I was thinking about when I was at court. We sit and give people awards, and it's the same thing in the military. We have something very similar to court in the military, in the Navy at least, that is called awards quarters, and it's where we all gather together and we give people awards for doing a good job. So it's funny how different subcultures exist. And the military, like the SCA, is a tiny little subculture with its own social rules and expectations.
So did you find the SCA before you joined the military, or was that after or during?
No, it was afterwards. Yeah, it was after. I joined in 20 uh I joined in 2013 and I finally found the SCA in 2018. Um I didn't have time to get out to it beforehand because I was on an aircraft carrier for a while, but I do remember seeing some SCAdians and being like, "Oh man, those guys look cool." And I even found their Facebook page. I just never had the chance to get out. I've heard rumors of there being a SCA barony on an aircraft carrier at some point that's long since been dispersed. Um, if I ever go back to the carrier, maybe I can convince some people to do SCA stuff there. We'll see. That'd be nice.
So when you fight, what style do you fight?
I like to fight greatsword. I'm learning sword and shield right now, but it's hard because a lance neck. There's a woodcut up. There's one woodcut, one piece of art of a lance neck using sword and shield, but it's in a parade, which means it's not. That's not how they would have fought. So especially after the year 1500, hardly anybody is using sword and shield anymore. I'm trying to learn it. Typically, I like to use polearm or greatsword. I'm by no means an expert. I'm very junior to the art, but those are the weapons that I find the most joy in.
What about horses? Do you ride horses?
I wish. I mean, part of what makes a person a landsneck is not riding a horse, actually. Landsneck actually are specifically a response to horsemen. So, like, technically, you could be a commander of a landsneck, you didn't ride a horse, but even those guys typically dismounted. So, riding a horse is actually kind of antithetical to being a landsneck. That is, being a infantry fighting unit.
So what about the women that we see wearing Lands Connect? Were there women fighters or were they just camp followers?
I'm sure. So Landsnake units would use their camp followers for work all the time, like digging trenches and cooking food. And because those women existed side by side with those men, I would think that there definitely were some of them who would probably dress up as men and pretend to be men in order to get the pay of being a fighter. However, we don't have any documentation of that actually happening.
Do you have a blog?
I don't have a blog. I do have a Facebook page and an Instagram. If anyone wants to go to that, I don't post a lot. And sometimes I just post memes and stuff. I need to start a blog because I really want to share my passion more. I just have trouble sitting down and actually doing it. So thank you for giving me this avenue to do that.
Yeah, I'm having a great time because I actually just told someone 2 weekends ago that I want to start. My persona is Hungarian, early Hungarian, and I'm a storyteller and I'm very big on the history and the stories of the Hungarians, but I'm also by um, genetics more German than I am Hungarian. So I've started dabbling a little more into German stuff. And one of the things I've always loved is the looks of the women wearing Lance Connect. So it's something
Yeah.
that I've wanted to play around getting. So my whole point is if you had a blog, I mean, all I'd love to know right now is your sources. Like what books should I get to start reading about Lance Connect? Where does somebody find this great library of knowledge in your brain, where can I find that in a book?
Okay, I mean, that's a complicated subject, right? It's so I'd say if you want a very generalized knowledge of what Lansnake were, there's a company called Osprey that makes very short books on a bunch of military subjects. They have one on the Lansnake, but that is a very what's a good word? That's a very summarized and base layer view of the Lansnake. Um, the Osprey book. So one of the things the Landsknecht are very famous for is sacking Rome in the year 1527. There's two books on that. One's by Luigi Guicciardini. He was an eyewitness to the sack of Rome. That's a very good one to get a sense of the time period and the geopolitical climate the Landsknecht existed in. Another one is called The Sack of Rome by E.R. Chamberlain. That was written in the 60s, I believe, and uses the Guicciardini book as a primary source. That's also a really great idea, great look to get into the politics and the social conditions that made the Landsknecht what they are. As far as their military culture, The Art of Renaissance Warfare on Kindle. I forgot the name of the author, but that talks about how Landsknecht fighting units fought, how much they were paid, how they would be equipped. The Art of Renaissance Warfare. Uh, hmm. I wish I had my library up here with me. Art of Renaissance Warfare. Renaissance Warfare by Sir Charles Oman, who's very famous for basically narrating all of military history. Those are the big ones. There's more. And obviously the very few shorthand accounts are very nice. There's one called I, Paul Dolnstein, Saw War, and there's an article about it on academia.edu that is completely free that goes into what the different types of Landsknecht were. For instance, like Landsknecht isn't a full-time job. Like Vikings, you can be a goldsmith or a cobbler and decide, oh, I'm going to go Landsknecht for the winter because there's going to be no work, and sign a contract to serve in an army for 6 months or so. So there, I, Paul Dolnstein, Saw War, which is an article on academia.edu, goes into that. Because it's also important to understand Landsknecht as a socio-cultural phenomenon and something people did, kind of like going Viking or the California Gold Rush or being super patriotic right after 9/11 and joining the army. It's got a lot of that.
So you mentioned something that's very fascinating to me, which is the sack of Rome. Why
Mm-hmm.
on earth did they sack Rome?
Oh, so that was a bad one, and it's a historical tragedy that we don't talk about a lot because basically, Landsknecht marched into the city of Rome and burned it to the ground. What had happened was, the Landsknecht were nominally under the control of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who was actually in Spain at the time, and they were fighting the French and the papacy, who were aligned against them in Italy. They had previously won a victory in the north of Italy at a very famous battle called Pavia, and they were slowly marching down Italy towards Rome with the goal of getting the French and the Papal States and the cities that were aligned with the Italian cities that were aligned with the Papal States to surrender. As time went on, though, the Emperor Charles V was unable to control the army. He was unable to pay it, unable to feed it, unable to clothe it. And the army itself basically went rogue and forced their commander to more or less weave a path of destruction south towards Rome, where they thought they would be able to take the city and get the most reward. So it was never an intentional thing that happened. They did it because they were not paid in a foreign land where they had absolutely no ability to make a living for themselves, and the Pope wasn't expecting it. So while the Pope himself was in the city of Rome, they besieged it, took towers up the ladders and burn it to the ground while also holding the Pope at siege for a few months, I believe, until they negotiated a settlement for him. It was never the intention of the generals or the emperor to do it, but it did happen, and we don't look at it very much because Rome at that time was a center of art, culture, money, banking, and it was basically destroyed. It's like the equivalent now of what if Washington, D.C. or New York was just sacked and millions died. Yeah.
Changing tack a little bit, do you make your own outfits or do you pay somebody to make them for you?
Unfortunately, I do have to pay people to make them for me. I'm not very tactile with my hands, and I do have a short attention span when it comes to manipulating fabric and armor and stuff like that. My beautiful girlfriend does make me some clothing. I also have a number of very good friends, some of whom have degrees in historical clothes making that make my stuff. So I'm very thankful to those people. Axel, if you're listening to this, please answer my messages. Ask Axel, I'm desperate, man. I love you. Please make me more clothes. I will do anything.
Nice. If you lived any closer, I could hook you up with somebody, but Cleveland's a little far to go.
Yeah.
So last question, I think, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I mean,
Oh, I sure do like Lansnick stuff.
I sensed that, and it was really exciting talking to you and learning the history of the Lands Connect. I don't think I've ever really I like the clothes. Like that's
Thank
pretty
you.
much
I
how
appreciate it.
shallow I am, and but to learn more about what they wore and what they did was really fascinating for me. So
Thank you.
so I guess the question I can ask is what's next for you in the SCA?
I intend to improve my historical accuracy, not just in my clothing, but also in my, my tent, my camp. I have a goal of having a period tent with period shelves and period cookware and everything being perfect. But basically, the SCA is a shared dream and a shared hallucination that all of us have. One of the beautiful things about the SCA is that it's a game that we all get to choose how to play. And the joy I get from the SCA, even though I fight, I don't fight to win. I don't fight to get anywhere. I don't fight for awards or do anything for awards. I just kind of enjoy being in armor and being in Landsnet clothes and doing that kind of stuff. So I would say I'm living my dream. I don't necessarily have any goals or any what's next other than what I've been doing.
All right. So what can the SCA do better?
What can the SCA do better? Um, you know, we have a great culture, uh, and we have a kind culture. But from the outside looking in, especially being in the military and trying to get young people, in their 20s to come and play, it can look a little creepy and weird. When you look at it from the outside, some of the things we do look cultish. Some of the things we do look strange. I don't know what the answer is to fixing that, and I'm not going to pretend to have it because I actively participate in SCA culture all the time. I do the SCA things, and they look weird to other people. I just think it's something to consider when we look at our approach. Um, and I also think we could give each other a little bit of breath. Sometimes we headhunt in online SCA, and we look for boogeymen. I think most people that show up are kind people. That's all I have really. I really do just play for fun. I don't know where things can be better.
Well, to just talk about it sometimes get it people forefront in people's minds is sometimes enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for giving me a stage to talk about Lance next stuff. I really do appreciate it.
We're gonna geek out some more together, you and me.
Yeah,
Um,
dude.
dude. All right, you have been watching Simply Scadian, no title required. This is Zoph. I've been talking with the incredible, amazing Engel, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.